Okay, so greetings from Boston. It's minus 10 degrees over here. Really cold. And yeah, it snowed a few days ago. And right now yeah, there's no snow at all. Whatever is remnant from the last few days, it's just around the pavement. I'll be leaving for Singapore this Saturday. And I'll be back in office on Monday. So we are continuing from last week, where we got into the topic of karma, which essentially means for every action, there is a corresponding reaction. What I'm going to do right now is just quickly cover what we did last week, in the hope that it refreshes your memory, in the hope that it gets you to start reflecting further on last week's class. Right. So we started off by looking at why do bad things happen to good people. We looked at some of the Abrahamic religions. How do they look at this particular topic? And then we also looked at Hinduism, right, or Sanatan Dharma. How does Sanatan Dharma get into this entire topic of bad things happening to good people? Even when you consider things or classify them as bad, are they really bad? Right? So essentially in Vedic science, it is explained that there is a concept called karma, that for every action which we engage in, there is a corresponding reaction, right? If we engage in good activities, then there will be a corresponding good fruit which we achieve from this. If we engage in a sin, then there is a corresponding difficult experience which we may have to go through. So those are the two types of activities which one would normally engage in. And the third form of activity which we discussed were activities which were spiritual in nature. And activities which were spiritual in nature, essentially, it uplifts us spiritually. And these activities also have a tendency of clearing our karma, right? If the universe would like to do that. Okay. So while the first two forms of activities, they continue to trap us in this material world, the third form of activity, which is spiritual activities, for example, meditation, chanting the Lord's name, right? Doing everything in the service of the Almighty. These are activities which do not trap us in this material world. In fact, they even have a tendency of eradicating whatever remnant sins which we may have. So we discussed this last week, right? And behind every calamity or a tragedy, an unanswered prayer, or the suffering of an innocent child lies the question, why do bad things happen to good people? It seems to imply that God is either not knowing, not powerful, or not at all good, right? And this is sort of a myth in the minds of many people who are not spiritualists. But for a spiritualist, he or she accepts that we have to take radical responsibility for our actions. And then we moved on to looking at, karma, which is another way of looking at karma would be the impressions, right? Whatever activities which we engage in, it's forming some impressions in our consciousness. And in time to come, this will fructify, right? And Vedic science explains to us this whole principle of self-realization, which essentially, we look at whatever is happening to us as an orchestration by the universe, right? And when we start looking at this as an orchestration by the universe because of activities which I have previously engaged in, then this fault-finding capacity, fault-finding mentality will also be somehow eradicated from us. Because what we are engaging in is basically personal and spiritual responsibility, right? We try to move away from this victim mindset or this victim consciousness. Yes, I may have been victimized, but I take full responsibility for this. Then we moved on to look at the this topic of responsibility, right? I commit to taking full responsibility for the circumstances of my life, and I keep on asking myself, what can I do about it from now onwards? How can I orchestrate my life so that the incidents of such activities happening in the future are as minimal as possible? And I also commit to myself that, I will not blame others for what is going wrong to me, right? I commit to, not having this mindset at all, because I am creating this experience for myself. So I've explained this concept many, many times, which is essentially Earth is a school. What we are learning is essentially experiences. Whatever we are going through, we need to keep on asking ourselves, what can I do about this? What can I learn from this episode? All right. And we can only graduate if we have that maturity in asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? Why is this happening to me? Right? How can I orchestrate my life from now onwards so that such incidences will not happen? Okay. Or this is a challenge I'm facing. Maybe this challenge is to stretch me. Maybe this challenge is to get me out of my comfort zone. This is really good for me. Okay. So then we spoke about the types of karma. Right? For every good action, there will be a resultant good reaction. And this good reaction can happen immediately, a few weeks later, a few days later, a few months later, a few years later, or sometimes we may even enjoy the results a few lifetimes later. Right? So for a spiritualist, then the spiritualists begin to wonder, wow, if I'm going to be enjoying these results a few lifetimes later, that also means that I will have to come back into this material world again and again and again, where birth and death is certainly, certainly there. So is this what I want? Because with every corresponding happiness in this material world, there will always be ups and downs, ups and downs. Is this what I want? Or do I want to be permanently coming out of this cycle of birth and death? Okay. So the easy answer to this question is yes, while I'm engaging in good activities, why don't I dovetail them to spirituality? Why don't I dovetail them to God consciousness? Why not, use this as a service or as an offering to the Almighty? Okay. The second types of activities would be activities which cause harm, right? Or bad actions, and they would certainly result in bad reactions. The reactions can happen a few seconds later. Sometimes people call it instant karma. Sometimes it can happen a few weeks later, a few months later, sometimes a few years later. That's when you will suffer, or I will suffer the reactions. Or it could be even a few lifetimes later. And then we have the karma activities. Simply means non or non-karmic actions. And they do not result in any material reaction. What they tend to do is they tend to uplift us spiritually, number one, and they can also if the Lord pleases, eradicate any remnant reactions which we may have to suffer in future. So what makes something material or spiritual is whether it is connected to God or not. I take a pause here to see if everyone is aligned, everyone understands this concept, if you have any other questions. What I'm doing right now is simply reinforcing what we have done last week.
Hello.
Yes, Pratul.
Yes, I sent a message in the chat, but I can read it out as well.
Sure.
So my questions with karma, they've been around how to feel towards other people who may be experiencing some suffering or some bad karma. So I used to like if someone is a victim, do we see it as that, or is it the fruit of their karma? But if you see it as that, then I used to think then, like, do they deserve pity or do they deserve our empathy?
Okay.
And I mentioned,
Yeah.
Yes. So my resolution towards that had been to see it as people who are trapped in a cycle of bad karma, and you can like to feel that that is something to feel pity towards, in the sense that these people are trapped in these cycles, and apart from that, to remember that injustice must always be fought against, and in general to be empathetic towards all. So that was my resolution, but I was wondering if you have any other insights on how to approach that question. Like, how do you respond to others? I mean, how do you feel towards others who are maybe experiencing suffering?
Yeah. Pratul, very good question. Very important question. Very important points you have just brought up. In fact, we deliberated on this extensively in last week's class. So
Okay.
please, just spend some time going back to the recording. Essentially, this whole concept of karma is something which I use on myself. All right. It does not give me the right to judge others. Right. That's point number one.
Okay.
Point number two, the meaning of compassion is to understand that, why someone is behaving in a certain way towards me, why someone is, causing me a difficult experience. It's also because when I'm expressing compassion, I'm also trying to tell myself that maybe this person, it is his upbringing, maybe what he has been going through, his entire series of experiences is resulting in him behaving in a certain way towards me. That's point number two. Point number three is the Earth School is also orchestrating that I should receive, all right, these experiences because of my own behavior. It's not really answering your question, but this is exactly what we discussed last week, right? So it is the way a person behaves, the way a person's activities are, it is because of, an entire chain of activities, reactions this person has gone through before. And that's now is the resultant, the resultant behavior. And my receiving that experience from him is also because of the Earth School wanting me to experience this. The Earth School wanting me to experience this because of my own reactions. So now, coming back to your question, when someone is going through a difficult patch, can I use this concept of karma on him? Once again, this is a concept which I use on myself. I cannot be judgmental on anyone else, because the moment I start engaging, and being judgmental on a person's behavior, a person's character, then I'm also incurring sin in this. So then what can I do? So number one is, sometimes people just want to be heard, right? When someone is going through a difficult patch in life, all the person wants is empathy, that, hi, John, I feel for you. I know what you are going through. If there's anything I can do to help you, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. All right. Don't ever say that you know, um, I understand what you are going through, and this is my advice to you, etc. No. At that moment when that person is going through a turmoil, he doesn't want that kind of advice from you. All he wants is someone to be around him. Okay, there may be a separate moment for advice, etc. But at that point in time, the person just wants to be having someone next to him who understands him without being judgmental. Okay, this is exactly what I've learned from my coaching practice, and I just wanted to share this with you. Can Pratul?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's exactly aligned to what you have mentioned.
Yes, yes. So for personal experiences, yes, that was quite helpful. Thanks for sharing. And then I think the other aspect of the question was like, for example, if you keep seeing the news, like, oh, there's a war over here, there's like the recent wildfire, so things like that. Just how do we feel about it? That's what I'm. want it.
Yeah, correct. I mean, for natural calamities like this to happen, um, certainly there is an element of karma in it, right? There is certainly an element of karma. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah, it is the karmic reaction of the entire community, possibly, at a certain place.
Okay.
Right. And another element which we also discussed last week was, if you look at the difficulties in life, which is birth, death, old age and disease. So these are like naturally coming to me, naturally coming to most of the population. So it is just a cycle, and sometimes we don't have to overanalyze whether this is a karmic reaction, etc. In the material world, these difficulties will come. Okay, sometimes an over-analysis is not required, right? With old age comes, some difficulties, frailness, sometimes breathlessness, sometimes difficulties in moving, etc. That is, naturally a difficulty which one faces when the person is getting old. So we don't have to overanalyze and say that, oh, this is a karmic reaction. Okay, that is just a byproduct of being in the material world.
Thanks for sharing.
Okay, so then we also discussed this sowing of the seed of karma. When I engage in an activity, a good one, for example, doing some charitable activities in the cold winter, maybe buying some blankets for the homeless, for the destitute. Wonderful activity, right? And then you have just sown the seeds of this activity, that the seeds will fructify slowly, and then will germinate into a plant, into a seedling, into a plant. The plant will start flowering, and the moment the plant starts, giving out fruits or fructifying, that is when the positive actions will culminate in some resultant fruit for me. Okay. So maybe, because of the good charitable activities, the earth is orchestrating that, I do more of these activities by maybe giving me more wealth. Right? But at the same time, if I see Pratul and, I'm jealous about his success, and I try to make life miserable for him, right? I puncture his tires, or, I throw a stone into his house, breaking the windows. uh, then then I'm also sowing the seed of my karma. The seed would then start germinating. It gets into a tree, grows into a tree, it forms flowers, and then finally it fructifies, right? The moment it fructifies is where I will get a taste of my own medicine. Okay, so this is how it works. So whenever we are facing difficulties, etc., there are three ways in which we can react. Number one is like a potato, we break down. Number two is like a cotton wool. Once it's in hot water, what happens is it becomes really hard, right? Or we could be like a herb where we still give off the best, right? So sometimes a challenge in life due to our own activities could be something which teaches us, right, some life lessons, stretches us to our maximum, etc. So try to see things or to reframe things. Then we also discussed, like, a spiritualist is naturally so humble and meek that the spiritualists accept any condition of life as a blessing from the universe, right? And the the spiritualist accepts that, yeah, maybe this is something which I've done in my previous life, or previously, and this is like a mercy I'm receiving from the Lord. If one orchestrate his life or lives his life with this conception of life, then whatever reverses the person goes through, he sees it as a mercy from the Lord, and he never accuses anyone. At the same time, this person is not passive, meaning that, it is not that, oh yeah, this is happening to me. Okay, la, it's just my bad karma. He's constantly asking himself, what can I do from now onwards? Right? How can I have this positive mindset that, okay, at the end of this, something good is going to be happening, right? That in this material world, there's certainly going to be ups and downs, right? How can I have that mindset? That is how a spiritualist look at it. So we discussed this last week extensively. So it brings us to this principle of acceptance is the first thing we need to have, even if we want to counteract. Yes, right? I accept that this is something happening to me. It could be a life lesson for me to learn from, maybe due to an activity which I had engaged before, right? Now, what do I do about this? Okay, so first is acceptance. Okay, now we move on to today's class, which is, I just want to know if Ellie is around. Ellie, are you here? Oh, she could not join. Okay, no problems. Right, so if there's this principle of karma, then what is the role of free will? Without doing anything, I'm already having so much of success. Without doing anything, I'm already having so much of wealth. Without engaging in anything, I'm already going through so much of difficulties. One may express to himself. Then what is the role of free will? Right? So each soul has free will, thereby making every individual responsible for choosing devotion or a positive activity over material engagement. Okay? That is the whole concept of mindfulness. Whatever I'm doing right now is because of my free will, right? I could have just continued sleeping, right? And waking up at about 8 o'clock and then going to the school. Or I could have woken up at 5 o'clock, engaged in meditation, chanting of my rounds, or I could have just engaged in completing my emails. So I have this free will on how I want to go in, how I want to engage my current possibilities. The free will is there. And this free will, this engagement, this current engagement is going to be resulting in my future activities or my future reactions. Okay? So that is the whole concept of free will. Whatever I do right now, okay, we have this minute independence, which will then decide what is going to be happening to me in future. So this whole concept of radical responsibility is about exercising this free will to turn every moment into a positive action or into an offering to God. I know it might be a little complicated. Okay, it's time for breakfast. How do I turn this moment into an offering of God to God? Okay, breakfast time. Whatever I'm doing, I ensure that it was produced with as little karma as possible, right? So which means that no living entities were subjected to pain or difficulty in the preparation of my breakfast. And then what do? I offer this to the Supreme Lord. After I've offered this to the Supreme Lord, I express gratitude, and then I partake this as an offering from the Lord. That's one simple thing. I'm getting into my office, right? So radical responsibility would be to tell myself that, I will give the best of my ability but I will not be attached to the results. Whatever remuneration I get, whatever success I get, I will use this back in the service of God, in the service of humanity. Okay? So we could either, just go with the flow, or we could be deliberate in asking ourselves and telling ourselves that every activity which I engage in, how can I ensure that this is somehow dovetailed to goodness, dovetailed towards spirituality, so that this activity will not trap me into this material world. Okay. Of course, initially it can be a bit difficult. It takes a lot of thinking, but as time goes by, it'll just be like free flow. Okay. I'll take a pause here. Any questions on the role of free will? Anyone? Okay, let's move on. All right. So the Bhagavad-gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? It's the scriptures from Vedic science explain that this material world resembles the waves of a constantly flowing river. All right. So waves, you have the ebbs and the flows, right? Therefore, what is a curse and what is a favor? What are positive experiences and what are difficult experiences? What is actually happiness and what is actually distress? It's like a wave, right? Up and then it goes down. Up, it goes down. Right? Even when we go to a operating theater, right? When we see movies where it's a scene of an operating theater, when you see the ECG machines, etc., there's always a up and a down and up and a down, right? You don't see an ECG straight line. Straight line means no more life. So this is exactly what Srimad Bhagavatam is explaining, that, in this world, there will always be a wave of ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. So whatever might be an amazing moment right now, we need to understand that, yes, this is a great happiness. This is a great positive experience I'm facing, but this is not going to be there forever, right? So because the waves flow constantly, none of them have an eternal effect. Okay? So things, they just keep on changing. Experience keeps on evolving. Change is the only constant, as they say. So never be discouraged. So this concept of karma should really push us to make a permanent solution, that, how do I come out of this ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs? How can I ensure that, okay, this is my last life in this material world. Once I leave this, right, at the end of my life, I don't want to come back into this material world again. I just want to go back to the spiritual world where it is never an up and down, up and down, up and down, as explained by the scriptures. So now let's go back to the root causes of sinful reactions. Number one is ignorance. In Sanskrit, you call it avidya. Essentially, forgetting that we are a spiritual spark. We are a spiritual entity on a humanly journey. That our constitutional position is to reconnect with our forgotten identity with the Lord. Right? So this is all ignorance. We have forgotten. True religion is one whose objective is to reconnect us back to our spiritual father. Right? So we have essentially forgotten our spiritual identity, and we think this earth school is not really a school, but this is a playground for us to keep on, orchestrating our life in full enjoyment, without realizing that whatever activities which we engage in will have a consequence. The second root cause of sinful reaction is our material desire, our craving for worldly pleasures, right? And this will fuel sinful actions. But the moment we start engaging in spirituality, actually the real litmus test of spirituality, the litmus test that we are progressing in our meditation, in our chanting, in our devotional service is that the hankering will reduce, and will reduce. That is actually the litmus test. All right. So if you have been engaging in spirituality for many years, the first question you need to ask yourself is, am I experiencing less and less material desires? Okay. If we are really experiencing less and less material desire until it reaches a stage where we do not have any of these material inclinations, all these worldly pleasures, then we can tell ourselves that, wow, we are actually really progressing in spirituality. All right. Otherwise, it's just a show. And thirdly, our past sinful actions. Whatever sinful activities which we had engaged in, these sinful activities will certainly result in sinful reactions. But even before the sinful reactions can materialize, what is happening is these sinful activities which I have engaged in, they are reinforcing tendencies towards repeated actions, repeated sinful actions. All right. So sometimes we just wonder, why is it that I've got so much of, inclinations towards doing certain crazy sinful activities? It is because of the sinful actions which we had done previously. They are like a snowball, right? Once you have started doing this, it's like a snowball. It will just give you more and more hankering for doing this. You don't have to really wait for the end result. Okay? Actually, along the way, the tendencies to engage in more sinful activities is reinforced. Very important point. Okay, I'll take a pause here. Namita, any reflection points, any clarifications you would like to have?
The third one is a bit deep, so I would want you to give us an example to elaborate probably the past sinful actions, the karma reinforces tendencies toward repeated sins. Now, my only question that comes here is, in other scriptures, or if we talk about there is a lot of importance of living in the present moment.
Yes.
How do you correlate living in the present moment, which is here now, this particular moment, versus with the past sinful actions, which we don't even know when, how, where were they, done? And so I always feel there is this conflict of, there is this thing that we have to live in the moment. We're talking about present, but when we read all about this, it takes us back because you've done something in the past which you have no control of. And that is also pulling you into this, section of where you are in a position of creating those tendencies or repeating those sinful actions. So how do you justify that? It's a bit, yeah, deep and a bit confusing for me. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a bit of
wonderful. So when we engage in an activity, what is happening is there is a timestamp, all right, like a timestamp put into our consciousness. So these are like impressions which remain in our consciousness. All right. So, right. Last night, I decided to cause some harm to an animal. I cooked a nice feast for myself. All right. According to the laws of karma, meat eating is certainly punishable. Right. So now I have already engaged in this. I had somehow orchestrated that the poor animal had to be killed for my palate. Okay. So now, while I am saying that today I'm going to be mindful, I'm going to be focused on what I can do right now. Whatever I can do right now is also somehow implicated by my consciousness, by the impressions in my mind, the impressions in my subconscious. Okay. As much as I want to be totally void from all of these impressions, it can never be like this, because we are never operating in a vacuum. Whatever I am today is because of all the impressions which are in my subconscious. So as much as I might say that I want to be mindful from now onwards, yes, great, but know for a fact that we are influenced by all of these impressions. So then what can I do about this? These impressions, all right, this sin which I have already incurred is somehow going to be making me engage further and further in sinful reactions. Okay. So research is actually proving that amongst teenagers, amongst youths, amongst folks who are in their 20s, pornography is a big, 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 distraction for them today. All right. Why is it that they go back again and again and again to pornography? They can tell themselves that, no, I'm going to stop today. But no. All right. Whatever impressions which we have, they will keep on somehow making us engage further and further in this. Okay. Is it making a little bit of sense?
Yeah.
So as much as we want to tell ourselves that I will be mindful, we are never operating in a vacuum. The place I'm sitting in, the consciousness which I have, it is all a result of, hundreds of thousands of activities which I have previously gone through. So the only thing which we can do is, if I am deliberately wanting to make a paradigm shift in my mindset, in my conscious set, then I need to engage in meditation. I need to engage in Mahamantra healing. I need to engage in devotional services, because these spiritual activities are so powerful, they can actually eradicate all of these impressions in our mind. My spiritual master actually made a public statement to a group of youths, telling them that if you can actually chant X number of rounds on a daily basis, right, and do not engage in this 4 activities which will pull you down, all right, I'll give you, a few $1,000 as a bet that you will actually change your life. So you need to be, not you, but one needs to be deliberate in wanting to bring about this shift. Just saying that I'm going to be mindful from today onwards, I've tried it many, many times, Namita. I've tried it many, many times. And I've actually personally realized that this change can only be brought about if we are deliberate on it. Deliberately wanting to bring about a change by engaging in spiritual activities. An example is Hui. I'm not sure if she has already joined, How is it that she brought about an entire lifestyle change to her own life, right? It's because of chanting. It's because of being deliberately, intentionally wanting to change this. Hui, are you there?
Yes. I'm on my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Anything to add over here?
I think also a separate topic is with the change that I have is also a lot of the word mercy might sound strange, but a lot of mercy and blessings from people, from the divine as well. It's not solely my effort, I feel.
Okay, that's your humility. The mercy is always there, like the sun rays are always there. If I lock myself in a dark room, not opening up the windows, do I get the sun rays? I do not. But the sun rays were there. Similarly, the mercy is always there from God, from, you know, from spiritualists, etc. The mercy is flowing. But whether are we receptacles to accept this? That is another point. Okay, so for me, you know, when I read this whole concept that our past sinful actions, somehow reinforces our tendency towards repeated sin, this was like a major paradigm shift in my mind. Yeah, I had to really think about it, because this was something which came as a surprise. Okay. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you go about breaking the cycle of sin? Right? Firstly, once again, engage in devotional service, bhakti, because it is so purifying. The names of God is so purifying, right? It purifies both the manifest and the unmanifest karma, right? So going back to this analogy over here, so when we engage in spiritual activities, if the Lord so desires, all of this can be eradicated. All right. Whether they are already manifest or whether they are unmanifested, which will manifest in future. That entire reinforcement, the point 3, will also be eradicated. And this is not something which we and I are saying, but this is explained in the scriptures very, very, very scientifically. And if I look at our spiritual practice, Hui's spiritual practice, my spiritual practice, and if I look at the early proponents of this practice, when it was brought to the Western world, actually, our founder Srila Prabhupada, he didn't really find, or he come up with this he did not materialize these teachings or come up with these new teachings and all. No. They were already there in the scriptures. Somehow it was forgotten and he just revived them. And I'm in Boston right now, and at the age of 67, he arrived in Boston Harbor, right? I'm just overlooking the harbor area, not overlooking, a little bit further. Exactly here is where Prabhupada landed. And who did he preach to? He actually preached to the worst of the sinful. All right, these were drug addicts, these were the hippies, and these were folks who were like, without clothes, in nudist camps, right? So can you imagine, these were the type of people who Prabhupada was preaching to. And what he would do was just sit under a tree and just chant the Maha Mantra. He would just sing the Maha Mantra. And slowly, one by one, these people were the first to actually come to him. They realized that, wow, his purity was exactly what Hui was mentioning. The mercy was actually going from him to them. And can you imagine, these are people who have been engaging in lifetimes of sinful activities. How is it that they could somehow change overnight? Right? Point number 3, which Namita inquired upon, and which I elaborated further. Then, those sinful tendencies were there. They keep on reinforcing more and more and more sins. But how is it that overnight they could change? It is because of this mercy. It is because of devotional service. Okay. So engaging in devotional service is so powerful. The names of Lord, right? They are so powerful. Right? The Catholics are also, always chanting on their rosaries. The Muslims are chanting on their rosaries. The Buddhists are chanting on the rosaries, because the name of the Lord is non-different from the Lord himself. Okay? And sometimes, we just need to tolerate the sinful desires. So going back to point number 3, that sinful actions will reinforce future desires. When those desires come, we engage in austerities. We tell ourselves that, no, I need to stop. All right. I tolerate this. I tell myself, I'm not going to be doing this. This whole engagement process, this whole process of telling myself not to do this is an austerity. And what is happening is, when I engage in that austerity, there is this whole avoiding this reinforcement of sinful activities. So tolerance can actually stop this reinforcement. Point number 1. The mercy which we receive from a spiritual entity, from God, can also stop this reinforcing sinful tendency. Okay? Namita, just reinforcing the point the question which you have. Does this point now make some sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And thirdly, it is following the regulative principles of freedom. So, in the Western world, we feel that, regulation is binding me, but actually, this whole concept of karma is actually teaching us that when we follow certain regulative principles, they are providing us freedom from this entanglement. Okay, so what are some of the principles? No meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication, and no illicit sex. Okay. So illicit sex means sex outside of marriage. Intoxication would be, drugs, alcohol, no gambling, okay, and no meat eating, no fish and no eggs also. All right. So when we don't engage in all of this, we are also breaking the cycle of sin. And finally, just surrendering to Lord. When we surrender, we also receive the mercy. I'm going to take a short break to get some water. I can hear you as I get to the to the tap for some water. So take a pause here. See, you have any questions for me? Any questions? No?
Yes,
Yes.
so I had a question.
Yeah.
So, is it difficult for people who, like say, don't follow the regulative principle, like say they eat meat regularly? Is it difficult for them to understand spiritual concepts? In this, like, if you were to talk to them about these things, just because of their current position, is it that they may struggle to understand the concepts?
I think they can understand the concept, but they may not have it, they may not be able to follow it immediately.
Okay.
And once again, we cannot be judgmental on them too. I'll tell you my own experience, right? So I was 18 years old when I was, after my A levels, before getting into university, I decided, for like 6 months before going into NUS, let me become a relief teacher. And one of the other teachers was, a proponent of Bhakti, right? So he was teaching English and history in Gunning Singh Secondary School, and I was teaching maths. And, just my first meeting with him, I could sense that, wow, this guy is different. And then, interacting with him, he one day invited me to the temple. So I was like 18 years old at that time. And just the first visit to the temple, just my first interaction with a larger community of bhakti yogis. I came back home that same day and I told my mother, I'm not going to be eating any more fish and meat, eggs. She was so upset with me. She says, what's going to happen to all that meat in the fridge? What do you think of yourself? I said, no, I'm not going to eat meat from tomorrow onwards. If you can't prepare something for me, what you need to do is before you put in the fish or the meat into the curry, just remove the curry for me. Yeah, so that is one situation. I got married. I fall in love with my wife, and she was a meat eater, right? And I wasn't judgmental on that. I said, I'll be vulnerable here. I said, no, I love you. I love you for who you are. It's not because of your diet or your preference. And so we got married. And, during the honeymoon, etc., she would be having her lobster and I would be having my nasi goreng. So along the way, 2 years with me, and now I'm like thinking of it, wow, 2 years with me and she did not change until my daughter was conceived. And then she told herself that, maybe I will become a vegetarian from now onwards. So the moment she knew that she was expecting, she says, yeah, I don't see any good in eating meat. I'll become a vegetarian. And along the way, that 2 years, my family was like so happy, wow, daughter-in-law is eating meat, son is not eating, he will change. But there was no requirement for me to change her. And similarly, there was no requirement for her to change me. Because there's no purity in me, even after 2 years, she did not, being with me, she still continued eating meat for 2 years. But then I'm just like contrasting to the spiritualists I met in the temple. Just one meeting and they changed my consciousness. So yeah, Pratul, I'm not, maybe it's a convoluted way of answering your question, but yeah, we just can't be judgmental. Everybody they will take time. All right. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. So I think, it's 7:30. I need to get ready for work too. So I'll stop the class here. Any questions? It's nice that we have a full group today. Nice. I'll be putting the recording over. And I'm going to be requesting Hui to take over from here. She would be doing the mindfulness practice, chanting, etc. And over to you, Hui. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining the class. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hui, I'm going to make
Thank
you
you
the host, okay?
Okay. So hi everyone. Sorry I missed the last 2 weeks. I was traveling. I brought my parents to Japan for fun. They really enjoyed the trip. So
You're a good daughter. By the way,
I wanted to travel for myself.
Hui has brought, Namita, you may know, Mayapur, etc. So Namita, Hui has brought her parents over to West Bengal to, the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and, they really liked it there so much. Yeah.
Awesome.
She's a good girl. Blessed her parents.
Yeah, please. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, let's do some reading exercise followed by the mantra. I see that Billion is new. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the mantra.